Welcome to the More in Common podcast. We all know how hard it can be to handle conflict and disagreements, especially when it comes to politics. These moments can strain even our closest relationships. And that's why we're here. I'm Keith Richardson, and for over 5 years, we at More in Common have worked with professionals from all walks of life, NFL teams, tech companies, and community leaders, ultimately to improve how people connect and communicate. And with my background in psychology, I've spent 20 years refining strategies that focus on compassion and understanding. And I'm joined by my co-host, Gerren, who joined the team 2 years ago. Gerren is a producer, an entrepreneur, and a creative, and he lives the principles we talk about, bringing real-world experience to every episode. Together, we're here to help you discover how we all have more in common than we might think. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to More in Common, the podcast where conversations spark connections and connections build community.
I'm Gerren alongside my man, Keith Richardson. We're going to dive deep into the human experience, challenging assumptions, and building understanding.
Whether it's from workplace dynamics to personal growth and everything in between, we bring you real stories and bold ideas that aim to bridge divides and create thriving connections.
Because when we embrace our differences, listen, and connect, we'll always find that we have more in common.
Again, with the wrestler announcement. It's going to be your thing. It's going to be
Listen,
your thing.
I'm a kid of the 90s, bro. Everything is like WWE to me.
I love it. Let's get into it. What are we going to get into
Let's
today?
get into it. Keith, today, I wanted to talk with the people about one of the underlying things of More in Common, the More philosophy, right? So it's a name, but it's also an acronym. So More, as More in Common uses, it stands for meet people where they are, being open to listen more, removing assumptions, and embracing curiosity. These 4 tenets are very, very powerful functions in the life that we try to achieve here and where we're trying to go. But today we want to talk about what it means to meet people where they are.
It's a good one. And I know we talked about this with Open to Listen More last episode, right? The nature of simplicity behind this acronym. It's just a reminder, like when we are triggered, when we are activated for anything, it's really difficult to think logically and rationally, borderline impossible, just based on the way the way our brain is functioning in those moments. So more is a reminder to put yourself in this space. It is how we manage ourselves when we are in a conversation that might be triggering. It might not even be triggering. It just may be high stakes, right? Or it might be awkward. It might be that awkward moment where you're just not sure what to do, right? I think meeting people where they are, being the starting point of it all, is super critical. Now, before I get into anything, because I can run on and on and on.
It's a talent.
One of my favorite things about the early start of this reboot is getting real personal feedback from you on the impact each tenant has had. You shared about listening last week and how that really changed going through the program that we deliver a couple of times, how that changed after being part of it. So meeting people where they are, like what is something about it that stands out to you or that sits with you, sticks with you, or whatever the case?
I'll go ahead and be a little bit vulnerable in this because I was one of those people on the internet that would cancel friendships for political statements, things like that in the past. And I realized that it's because I was doing exactly the opposite of what we're talking about here. Having an expectation that other folks are going to come to a difficult topic or question with the same life experience, perspective, values, and other things that you carry is folly, right? First of all, that's folly. But I feel like in this hyper polarized world where people choose their sides, it's much easier to look around and be like, well, all these people share the same thought with me, so you must be the wrong one, right? So it's easier to say, well, since I have an echo chamber that's supporting everything that I'm saying and doing, I must be okay, and you must be the one with the problem. Instead of realizing that, like, you only know what you know. It's like giving Shakespeare to a 2-year-old, right? Like, they don't have enough words to really even process or understand. There's not enough perspective. There's a lot of things that need to happen before someone can digest what Shakespeare is trying to tell us. And that has nothing to do with age, chronology. In reality, it has to do with your life experiences, your level of exposure, and what you're willing to accept as reality in your world. Because sometimes even when you're exposed to things, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily ready to accept it as something that's like valid, true, and okay. So I think that the practice, and we can get into how we manifest that practice in our life, but the practice of reminding myself that the job is to meet this person where they are is pretty deep, and has helped in a lot of hell, it's even helped in my relationship with my own father in some ways. You have to accept your parents, right, where they are. Sometimes they have advice that they didn't follow when they were raising people and stuff like that. But it's like, yo, I get it. I get where you are. I get why you want to make this point right now, even if it has very little to do with your own achievements, experiences, and ability to do stuff. So that's how it's really, and again, it's something that you feel like you think you know. You feel like you always knew that you're supposed to meet people where they are, and you don't make assumptions about their past. And I feel like we've always, you grew up talking about that. But as you get older and as you experience life and surround yourself with like-minded folks, it is easy to fall into that well of I'm right because everybody around me agrees with what I'm saying.
Dude, that element of, like, I think what you just shared, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And that journey that you've gone on, in particular, the vulnerability about having passed, like, oh, you think this, so you're done. I think what this really speaks to is why we care about doing this podcast again. Like, in 2024, and I'm not saying this is a unique circumstance of 2024, but with our ability to surround ourselves with a large amount of people, absolutely speaking, like if I surround myself with 100 people that all think exactly alike, from a cognitive standpoint, that is wildly validating, even if it's only 100 people from a relative standpoint. In other words, 100 people out of 8 billion is not a lot. But from an individual standpoint, that 1 to 100 ratio is wildly validating as an individual. Now you multiply that by 100, because that's what social media gets you. A bunch of likes, a bunch of follows, a bunch of people who say, yes, I agree with you. You are saying the truth. Thus, it forms our sense of truth. And we'll talk about this probably a lot more in the future. I like to tease out potential future topics that we're not talking about. Is the structure of cognitive bias, right? And what it is, and what, I don't want to dive too deep into it, but there's a thing, it's called the normalcy bias, right? We normalize things. And I'll use smell as a great example. When you walk into a room and there is a putrid odor, you smell it. When your brain is not affected by that negatively due to it being a threatening substance that is producing the odor, once it's determined there's no threat, you stop smelling it, right? It normalizes in your environment, unless it's like really, really bad, right? And it's just stinky and you just need to leave the room. Ask my wife about me when, I'm in a gassy state. Let's be vulnerable here, right?
I was like, is this fun?
I know, right? Right? But like we've all experienced that. It's just a normalized thing. We do
Well, yeah,
that
I
with
mean,
everything. Oh, go ahead.
even sometimes food smells, right? Like you can come into a
Yes.
place and it smells like, whoa, what is that? And then as you know what it is, you get accustomed to it, like you stop noticing
You
what
just
that.
stop like the house you live in. If you ever leave your house, I do this all
Mm-hmm.
the time because we have cats. So
Mm-hmm.
when we leave the house for a week and we come home, I'm like, does our house stink? You know what I mean? Like, is this what other people are experiencing? Because every day I walk in this house, I don't smell
Right.
anything,
Right.
right? It's just normal unless there's a change to that environment. So when you think about the journey that we all go on in life, we are creating these cognitive normative spaces in order to create our truth. That's our value structure, what we believe. These aren't necessarily objective facts, but we see them as objective facts because it makes it easier to process the environment that we're in. We talked about it before. We are survival creatures. We cannot consistently process every piece of information that we come into contact with on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis. If we did, we'd all be dead. Like that's just, our brain would not be able to function. We would stop walking. Something would give up, right? Because our brain, as powerful a computer as it is, cannot do all the things, right? It does a lot, but not all the things. And so these truths start to manifest. They form our identities. They form the things that we become. And pass over the course of several years, you are now asking someone to change what has been normalized for their experience. And it's not a logical thing, right? I want you to get it, but what I need you to do is feel it. And if I don't feel it right away, we're going to talk about feelings later. If I don't feel it right away, I'm not going to change the way I think about it, because by changing the way I think about it, it is uncomfortable. I have to grapple with possible identity shifts in myself. If you're telling me something and like shame and guilt start coming into play, all of this is the journey every one of us goes on when now all of a sudden we're confronted with something that changes the way we see the world. I'm not just saying the way we think about a thing. It's literally challenging the way we see the world. Now we're in survival mode, right? My brain, I do not want this because it's uncomfortable. It's all of these things. And we're not taught to do these things. We're not taught to process these things. We're just, we're taught to go through life and absorb all of this stuff. So with all of that said, when you're coming into contact with somebody and a situation is awkward, uncomfortable, angry, like it's a triggering communication, it's a triggering sentiment, the first thing we do need to assess is this person actually being malicious, right? Because let's be honest, if you're coming across someone who literally wants you hurt, harmed, or worse because you're Black, like I'm not interested in meeting you where you are,
Yeah,
because
I'm not sticking around for that clan
like
party.
I'm not sticking around. Yeah, I'm not sticking around. It just reminded me of Dave Chappelle. So I laughed even harder than maybe it was. But
Hey, no, it was a good joke, bro. You don't have to don't
yeah.
backtrack now.
You laughed at me, and that's real.
That's right. I earned it. I earned that laugh.
So you come into contact. Okay, set that aside, right? Because we do have this ability. It's a wonderful ability to generalize threats that are very singular in incident, right? Like that person, that avatar we just discussed, now all of a sudden represents everybody that you're going to have a conversation with that might say something similar, but they aren't coming at it maliciously. They're coming at it because that's what they've been socialized to say, think, or feel, right? So then you add in the element of this fundamental truth. We talk about this a lot in our training. There is literally only one person that you spend 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with. And I know I did that all backwards. It's yourself, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
there are other elements that interject into these situations. Someone might say something that they think, maybe they feel or have felt, but they're saying it angrily and with hostility. And their anger and hostility might actually have very little to do with the thought itself. It has to do with the fact that they woke up this morning at 1 a.m. and they've been up since because they didn't get a good night's sleep. You have no idea, right? It could have something to do with the fact that they just took their kid to get an MRI, which this just recently happened to me. And I don't have the results yet. I do now, but right afterwards, you don't have the results. So everything is swirling through your mind. What is going on? What is happening? I'm not really concerned in that moment about how I'm talking to you, right? And I need a little grace in that situation. So when we talk about meeting people where they are, it's just this fundamental reality is that we don't know anything about them in most situations. Even take your spouse. You've heard this story. You wake up and your spouse is mad at you because you did something bad to her in your dreams.
Yeah.
Or in her dreams, right? Or vice versa. I've felt that before. You wake up, you had a bad dream and you woke up just from the dream and now you're feeling all kinds of ugh. And now you're just irritated at the other person, not because of anything that they did. It's not rational. And it's not justified either. However, our ability to sit and just recognize that whatever this person is saying, doing, how they're acting in this short, brief spurt of interaction needs more inspection, right? I need to know more in order to truly assess what we can do with this conversation versus just jumping to a conclusion, passing judgment, and then saying, forget it. That person is absolutely out of the circle and we're done.
I think that connects back to kind of some of the points we were making last week's episode about what's the goal there, right? What's the goal in that conversation? Are you actually trying to change someone's mind, or are you really interested in understanding their viewpoint? Are you really interested in understanding where they're coming from? And it also touches on something, and I want you to tell me more about this, because one of the things that we do in More in Common is create a distance between empathy and compassion. And I feel the initial response for people when they think about meeting people where they're at is about empathy. But I actually disagree. I would index that it's not, and I want to hear what you think about it.
No, my God, such a good point. It isn't. It isn't. Empathy is feeling what the other person feels, right? It's being able to process and feel what they're feeling. And compassion is action-oriented, based on understanding to alleviate the other person's suffering. Whatever that suffering is, just a desire to want things different, right? So you take that definition and you're in a situation where someone says something about politics and they're angry about it. That is a form of suffering, right? We're not talking about deep-rooted medical suffering. There's a scale here. But when we're talking about compassion, let's just simplify and say that is a form of suffering, because that person wants it to be different, right? To start the compassionate action in that space is just to understand that, oh, they're coming from a place. I don't know why. Maybe something happened. They just went to the border the other day and something happened. Or there's so many variables to our human experience that we try to fill gaps in because we're trying to, going back to the brain, we are trying to simplify our processing of other people really, really fast. So we can make social judgments and determine if we want to continue creating a relationship. The problem with that is it's ideological survival. It is not physical survival, but they manifest the same, right? These are the same thing. This is how we are feeling it. So yeah, I am separate. I am now like, oh, I can't talk to you because you threaten me. It's like, yeah, but you're not. The real threat is the long-term impact of isolation from each other, not the short-term impact of discomfort for this conversation. So when we go into that space, like, we have to recognize that suffering can be assisted by simply asking a question, going back to last week, of like, hey, like, what is it that you want to see different? Like, why does this make you so angry? I'm curious. I don't have the same level of feelings about this that you do. So I'm curious, like, what is it about this issue that fires you up so much, right? And if, kind of going back to the parameters conversation, I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Would you be willing to hear what I have to say in response? That person might be like, no, I don't care what you have to say. Then maybe we don't have this conversation, but I can still seek clarity to understand more of where you're coming from and then end the conversation there, right? I'm not going to share my thoughts with you because you've already told me you're not willing to hear them. However, going back to listening, if you give someone that space and then you listen to them, you are more likely to activate their interest in hearing what you have to say. But you got to get them there first. And that starts by meeting them where they are. This isn't, and it's not, and look, it's not just, hey, my dad is 66 years old and he comes from a different generation and they grew up differently. Yes, that all plays a role. But we also have to look at it understanding, like, I can't judge you in this moment because of this moment, because I have no idea what happened the moment before. And if I can reset, like, this has been one of the hardest journeys for me, because it's really emotionally hard. Like, there's you talk about the empathy element. Empathy is feeling the other person's feeling. What we would suggest is you need to separate yourself from their feeling so you can just live in your space while they live in their space in order to bridge the gap with conversation. You're not trying to bridge the gap with emotional experience. You're trying to bridge the gap with conversation to draw out a more meaningful connection that's not attachment. Don't want to be attached to your emotional experience because now we're both in trouble. It's just really difficult to do that. And we're not taught to do that. Plus, we're inundated with a bunch of information. So we're all trying to process all kinds of stuff and create truth out of it. Right? And I'll land with this. One of my favorite things to visualize this is if you're sitting across from somebody, and I wish we could do this, but we're not sitting across from each other, is you put a piece of paper on it, on the table, and you draw a number 6 or number 9, whatever it is. So the other person is looking at this number. It is the opposite of what you're looking at. Who's right? Is it a 6 or is it a 9? We don't have the little line that distinguishes it, the little
Right.
Uno line,
The Uno
right?
card.
Like, we don't have that. So to me, it's a 9. To you, it's a 6. Who's right? And why does it matter does it matter to actually determine this? Or can I go to your side of the table and see, oh, I see how you see it's a 6. Can you come to my side of the table and see how I see it's a 9? And then we decide what to do with it from there.
We'll be right back with more in common after this.
Hey all, I'm gonna take this quick break to tell you about something else that I'm a part of. I sit on the board of a foundation called the Be Brave Foundation. We are an organization that helps families who have children with 100% incurable terminal neurological disorders. They require a lot of assistance, and primarily they require help making sure that they have time with each other. And that's what we do. We help them navigate the healthcare system. We help them acquire things like ramps, wheelchairs, and other things that just make the quality of life and time together more enjoyable, because they only have so much of it. Go check out bebravefoundation.org if you're looking for an organization to contribute to this year. It is an absolutely amazing organization for your money to go a long way helping these families who definitely want to spend more time together while they have it.
And now the conclusion of our conversation. I think that's part of the reason why I decided to make such introspection, because we are all on different journeys, right? And approaching a peer from different directions can look vastly different for people based on the direction that they're approaching and what that means. But I also want to touch on how this helps us in our work environments too, because I feel like there's a lot of silos that happen in work cultures kind of in the same ways, right? People meet Tom, they make assumptions about Tom. Tom doesn't really like to work, so like he's not included. We don't ask Tom questions. Like Tom's opinion becomes less important to the overall group. But when you do try to meet people where they're at, you might find that, you know, Tom's just a little extra shy and like maybe need that extra piece of encouragement. Like, can you talk more about how in work culture and inclusivity in teams, meeting people where they're at can be a benefit?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many applications here. I mean, we'll start with the principle of the best idea wins, right? We have the tendency, especially in a lot of corporate spaces. Look, I get it. We'll talk next time about meeting ourselves where we are, because this is a really, really important element to meeting people where they are. But if you're in a corporate space and there's a lot of fear or anxiety associated with saying the wrong thing and then maybe getting fired, you're likely to shut down because it goes back to psychological safety. It's not there, right? At the same time, there are a lot of corporate spaces, and I've worked in them, that really celebrate individual effort. So if it's celebrating such individual effort, you want your idea to win all the time, right? Understanding that's what other people are doing is really, really helpful, because the reality is, in the right environment in work where the best idea wins, we can seek what other people are thinking and get clarity as to where they're coming from to ultimately come up with, not take, but come up with the best idea to move forward, right? That's a start. But then you bring up the whole, Tom doesn't like to work, right? Oh, he's a millennial, quiet quitting. This reminds me of my relationship with Rodney and working with him in this business. And I mean, we've been coworkers at companies as well. Rodney has ADHD. And I'll share that publicly. Sorry, Rodney, but this is important for landing the point. So there are things that he has a hard time with. One of them is called time blindness. Time blindness, those with ADHD out there probably know what I'm talking about, but many people don't, is that internal clock doesn't exist. So a 5-minute conversation can go on for 10 hours for him, and he feels like it's 5 minutes. Now, I, in particular, do not have time blindness. In fact, it's a superpower for him because he can be intensely present in any moment. Whereas for me, I have a constant clock running in my head. Is the call done? Hey, we're recording right now. Have we been recording too long? Is this a 30-minute episode? Is it a 40-minute episode? Right? Like, But and that creates an anxiety for me, but I'm also really good at managing time. Well, if I meet Rodney where he is and understand that, I, with an ability to do it and not a lot of effort, then can take the role of managing time when we have calls together, or reminding him that we have a call coming up. Instead of thinking of him, oh my God, he's so irresponsible. Right now we're adding in the personal judgments and the personal things because this isn't how I do it. I'm fine at this. I'm good at this. Why aren't you, Rodney? Well, it turns out he's not because he's not. Like, it's just not. I rely deeply, quick tangent, just to trigger the pivot that I'm going to make here. I rely deeply on my wife to navigate. My wife's ability to walk out a door and tell you which way north, south, east, and west is without looking at the sun is remarkable, right? She makes fun of me all the time. She does not meet me where I am on this. I walk out the door and I'm facing north every time. Like, that's how I process direction. No, that's not true. I always turn left. Right? And my instinct to turn, we laugh about it. It's like, should we turn right here? No, it's left. Should we turn left here? No, it's right. Is almost 99% the case. I don't have an internal sense of direction. I'm working to train it. It is wildly difficult for me.
Yeah.
And it comes supernatural to her. So this is the meeting people where they are. So you can leverage each other's strength to make a better ecosystem together versus judging each other's weaknesses. So you're making a better ecosystem for no.
Boom. And I think that's super important because there's so many people who I feel like believe in inclusivity and believe in the power of inclusivity, but also like create these little pockets where not being all that inclusive. But true inclusivity, it really does. It begins with acknowledging the uniqueness of each person's journey and meeting them where they're at on their terms, right? Like not applying judgment or labels or like, you must be this because you think that kind of things that we're very, like you said, often to do because it's easiest, because our brains want to make the things simplest so we can use that energy on other things. However, when we fight that urge, we really can get a lot further along, both in teams and interpersonally, by meeting people where they're at currently.
And we talk about this. I mean, like, we're at this point, I think anything more, I'm just muddying the waters with this. I'll clarify any questions that may exist to whomever's listening. But I will go back to it. It, like listening, it requires everybody to do it for each other. This can't be, I meet you where you are, but you don't meet me where I am. Because if that's the case, it will create friction. So in a team environment at work, it's important not like that we all do it individually for the betterment of each other and the collective, not just doing it for ourselves, for the benefit of ourselves. But it does start with us. It starts with how we show up. And then you send this podcast to the other person and say, hey, I need you to listen to this so you can meet me where I am, so we can be as productive as we possibly can in the workspace.
Man, that is, we've given everybody a lot to chew on, Keith, on this episode. I think that I'm so glad, first of all, that we're breaking down what the more in common philosophy is for people, because I think that even if you haven't gone through the trainings necessarily, there are things that you can take away from implementing some of these points in your life and in your daily conversations. And everything is about practice, right? Like if you're not doing it in practice, then you're not going to do it in the game. So we got to keep taking those shots, keep trying these things, and hopefully we'll be able to figure it out.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Thanks for starting up this conversation. And have grace with yourself too. Like, this is not easy. You don't need to do it all the time, because we're going to talk about this next week, because meeting yourself where you're at is really important too. So until that conversation, we'll get with you next time.
More in Common Podcast. I'm Gerren, that's Keith, and we'll see y'all soon.